now it's time for the latest edition of our recurring series, Friends of Frank, where I chat with some of the many people I know about the things they know or what they've been working on lately. And today, we'll be playing my conversation with engineer Lance McLeod. He's a water practice leader for the infrastructure consulting firm Halff. We discuss the water crisis. I don't know if you know we have one, but we do here in Texas, and the issues surrounding our water infrastructure are serious. So let's sit back, relax, and enjoy. Here's Lance McLeod, a friend of Frank. Good morning, Lance. How are you? Thanks for being on Friends of Frank.
Good morning. Happy to be here, Frank.
I'm glad you are. So let's just dive right into the water issue. If you like that pun, that was kind of a pun. Because water, you and I were talking, water by some measures now is more valuable than oil.
True. And I would say that since, of course, life needs water, it's technically always been more valuable than oil, but it's historically undervalued in this country. It drives our economy and our energy production. Water's that silent partner cornerstone of our survival and growth, which is true in Texas, the U.S., and globally.
Well, we take it for granted. We turn on a shower, the water comes out. We take the tap, and the water seems to always be there. In fact, there's always this admonishment that you're not drinking enough water. It's like indicating there's plenty of it. But there is a serious water shortage, especially in the state of Texas.
Yes, and I would define it more as we're on the cusp of a water crisis. Texas has always been a relatively dry state. On the east side of Texas, the amount of source water is not necessarily an issue, but as you move westward across the state, it definitely gets scarcer, and you end up in issues with shortage, definitely there. But our water crisis is due to an aging water infrastructure issue. A lot of our infrastructure was built in the 50s to 70s, and it's crumbling. We were losing billions of gallons in Texas per year just through leaks. And the boil water notices we see are typically stem from infrastructure failures, either at treatment facilities or other delivery systems.
Well, I know in his State of the State, Governor Abbott addressed all the leaks in South Texas. I guess that's part of what you're referring to.
Sure, but there's other issues as well. Here in the Houston region, for instance, we've had issues with overpumping. Throughout the last century, we're taking more water out of the aquifers than they could replenish. And when that happens, the aquifers compress. And when that happens, the ground literally drops. We call that subsidence. And once an aquifer compresses, it does not recover. So that damage has been done, and we're trying to alleviate that.
So, and I don't want to get off that subject, but I know that most of the lakes in Texas are man-made, almost all of them. And as you said, in the 50s, especially when we were going through after the Dust Bowl of the 30s and then the drought of the 50s is when we decided to build Lake Conroe and Lake Livingston and Lake Houston and have these reservoirs of water. But is that simply not enough?
It's not enough, and we certainly are not doing much more of that. Water supply lakes are pretty much finished. There are some still in the planning stage, but for the most part, they've become, cost prohibitive now due to real estate issues and environmental mitigation concerns. We know much more about, the impact that these types of constructed facilities have on the environment. So they become a real challenge to do any more in terms of creating additional water supply reservoirs.
So we really have to fix what we have because we're not building more.
Right.
So that's the message that I get from the aqueducts that are going through subsidence and the fact that we're not building more reservoirs. And so if we don't do that, is there a X number of years where we're going to run out of water if we're not careful?
Well, let me put it this way. The bottom line is that we have 1,500 new people moving to Texas every day. That's a projection of 22 million more folks by 2070. And in the same time, we are predicting that we're going to have a decrease in our supply of water by 18%. Thirsty people are desperate people, Frank, so something needs to change.
Yeah. I'm talking to Lance McLeod of Halff Engineering about our water shortages and our water issues here on Hello Houston. He's a friend of Frank for sure. So as we were just saying, if we double our population, because we're at about 28 million, so we almost double it by 2070, and the amount of water goes down by almost 20%, we're going to be in a world of hurt if we don't either find a water source or fix what we have.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I know as an engineer, you're working on fixing what we have. Let's talk about other sources of water, one being, I guess, desalination of what's out there in the Gulf.
Sure. So desalination is basically converting, salty water for potable use. And there's two aspects. There's one, it's called brackish desalination. We call desal. So there's brackish desal, which is basically taking really salty aquifer water that has historically not been usable. And there's also coastal desal, where you're taking the water literally from the ocean, converting it then to potable drinking water.
But that can't be cheap. That's got to be really expensive.
It's very expensive, and it's been part of the issue of why it hasn't been done that much in Texas up to this point, just from the cost standpoint of that. But as the technology advances, things get a little bit cheaper in terms of what can be built, but also, as I said, desperation promotes that necessity where, hey, we've got to find these other solutions. And so that threshold from a political and cost standpoint are starting to merge with come down to where the point where both systems are now allowing for desal to be a true option.
So where would you put a desalination plant? Do you have to put it at the coast, or you
No.
can put it a little inland? So you could take that water and move it somewhere inland.
Well, again, there's brackish desal that could be done in an aquifer, so it's not necessarily on the coast. But regardless of that, if it's on the coast or even inland, then you still got to move that water from where that facility is located to get it somewhere, just like any other treatment facility.
Yeah, so it's pricey. But that's one solution, at least partial, is desalination. The other is a project called Toilet to Tap, which is exactly what it sounds like. And it's already in use, right? I know Midland, Odessa, this is coming out of West Texas. So I will let you, the engineer in charge here, tell me how Toilet to Tap works and what it is.
Well, first of all, I'd like to, in the industry, we don't like to utilize the phrase toilet to tap because there has a negative stigma associated with it. What we refer to it as is direct potable reuse, which is basically taking, again, your wastewater treatment discharge that has been treated to a very high standard and blending that into your water supply. If you do that directly, that's why it's called direct potable reuse versus indirect, which is going either into a stream or into a lake or being injected back down into the aquifer.
Well, it makes perfect sense. I mean, there's a lot of water. People take long showers. All that water goes somewhere. Why shouldn't we be using that, which is, I guess, what they call gray water? But we should be using gray water and wastewater as well as we can. It shouldn't just go away.
Well, true. And we're certainly are using it in some ways already. And again, we're treating it down to a very high, pure standard that's coming out. But certainly we're using it on golf courses and other ways to try and, find different ways to use the water that just don't need to be necessarily treated to the extent that our drinking water does. But even with our drinking water in Houston, we get in the summer during August, we get 60% of our water from the Trinity River is actually effluent from Dallas. So we're already getting some of that indirect potable reuse happening.
And if it was a problem, we would know about it. If it was, if it was making people sick or it was not working, we would already know about it. It's already had a number of years of use out there in Texas.
Sure. Now we're just talking about what I would say is the stigma of having a direct source from our wastewater treatment facilities being used, but we're going to get over that.
We are, because we're going to have water. So you can get used to anything, as my mom always said. This is a quick question. Speaking of my mom, we always drank out of the tap and the hose when I was a kid. And now you just don't drink water if it's not bottled water. I still do, but so many people are like, I need bottled water. Do you think bottled water has helped or hurt this whole water situation?
I don't think it certainly helped. I mean, by the way, drinking out of the tap is perfectly fine, Frank. It still is to this day. Most bottled water actually comes from public water systems. So in an indirect way, you're getting it regardless of whether you're drinking it out of a bottle or drinking it out of the tap. So when you think of it that way, we still have the public infrastructure issues that drinking from bottled water doesn't solve. Then you lump in the fact that a lot of water needs in Texas from agricultural, industrial, commercial, and residential use. So needing all of that water, really drinking out of bottled, isn't really a solution that's going to help with our water needs.
Yeah. All right. I've been talking to Lance McLeod, Vice President at Halff Engineering, about the water shortages that face Texas, especially between now and 2070 as our population grows. I'm going to leave it there for now, unless there's anything you want to add, Lance, to that particular subject.
Just one more item is that we're starting to look at produced water out of processes for the petroleum industry as another potential water source. With fracking, we produce, that's the wastewater from fracking. They produce about 5 to 7 barrels of water to 1 barrel of oil. And if we can harness that water and utilize that as well, it's certainly something to consider. And we'll be looking into that in the future.
Oh, okay. That is why we have engineers like you to come up with these great ideas and these solutions. Lance McLeod of Halff Engineering, thanks for being a friend of Frank, and thanks for being on Hello Houston.
Thanks for having me.